If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. First of all, it's free, so you might as well try it out. Secondly, Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Welcome to my podcast. I am Esther, the career coach, and I specialize in empowering women of color with the tools needed to reach their career goals and break through glass ceilings. If you are interested in taking control of your career, listen to this podcast for weekly episodes of career advice. Also, follow me on Instagram at Esther the Career Coach and check out my website, estherthecareercoach.com, and feel free to email me at empower@estherthecareercoach.com for a free 30-minute empowerment session. So, let's get started. Thank you for tuning into my podcast, Esther the Career Coach. I am so excited to have you with me. I am so excited for you to be here as I host my very first episode and my very first podcast ever. Thank you for being with me. So in this podcast, what I want to do is talk about my background, what makes me credible for this topic. I also want to share my story, and I also want to share my goals. What do I envision this podcast to be, and what the layout may look like? So, a little bit of background. I am a career coach that specializes in helping women of color achieve their dreams. So I work with them. We do empowerment sessions, and the women tell me some type of goal that they want to achieve, and I coach them through that, and I provide action steps for them to do in between sessions. So it's really great. Both they and I were able to see their journey. We're able to see them reach whatever they want step by step. And then I get to connect them with some other awesome women of color. So it's really dope. So I've been doing that. That's a side hustle for me. I've been doing that for about a few months. I started in, I want to say August, September. And so it's May now, so about 9 months or so. And my 9 to 5 is in career services. So I work at Boston University as an assistant director of career education. And my role there is to provide career counseling for the student body. So for undergraduate students, which are typically between the ages of 18 to 22, I also provide service to graduate students who range in ages, right? They can be the typical late 20s, early 30s, but people go back to school at any time. And so they really range in age. And then I also provide service to alumni. So I've seen alumni as old as 66 who want to make a pivot in their career. So a lot of different topics come up, and it's a range. So I help people and clients with self-reflection. That's pretty typical with the younger age group. Self-reflection, who are they? What is that going to look like in a major in a career? And then some career exploration. What do I actually like? And actually, I think this is a life journey. In a lot of career development theory, it is considered a life journey. And then I get the master students who for the most part, they either worked or they know what they want to do. So they just want help with that job search. How do I make that step into this new field if they're making a pivot? And then there are still a few graduate students who are like, wow, I still chose the wrong grad program, or I went straight from undergrad to grad school and I didn't have time to really explore what I liked. So I get those as well. And then I just help, there's some people, alum or the clients that I meet who are already in a career and they just want to advance professionally. Again, a common theme is pivoting, or they want more money, right? Salary negotiation, that comes up. And I also do mock interviewing. And so a lot of these topics that I just talked about, I definitely want episodes on that. So that leads to the next part. What is the goal? How do I envision this podcast? So the goal ultimately is to provide practical advice for women of color. You all range in age, in industry, in lifestyles, and belief systems. And sometimes you just need to hear from another person of color great advice. You may hear it from your coworkers or friends, but if you don't identify with them, or if your story is slightly different, right? Because, we have these glass ceilings, right? The glass ceiling as a woman, but also as a person of color. I mean, particularly if you're a first gen student, or if you come from other underrepresented backgrounds, your journey is different, right? And so what I want to do is provide some advice on how to navigate that journey within your identity and be empowered in it. So the goal would be to have an episode in which I dive into one of these topics that I talked about. And then the next episode would be an interview. And the person that I would be interviewing, a woman of color, the topic would be on the same thing. So for example, next week, my goal is to talk about that self-reflection, really owning into what your values, your interests, your personalities, your skill set, owning in those things. And so that means that the episode after that, episode 3, what I would want to do is interview someone who's experienced that, whether they're going through it at that moment or they've experienced it a few times throughout their life in which they had to reevaluate themselves, reevaluate their priorities and their goals and make sure that everything is aligned. So that's essentially what I want from this podcast. In addition to that, my ultimate goal once I get enough listeners is to do some coaching right on the phone, right? Or on this podcast. So someone call in, they have a question, they want some advice, and right then and there, I provide some advice and coaching. And that would, of course, be free of service if you listen to my podcast. Ultimately, I would want it to stay a free podcast, or through Anchor, which I'm using. There's some ways for you to donate. But this would be an opportunity to do that. And then secondly, I want to hear your stories. Ultimately, I want to hear your stories. I want to hear your breakthroughs. I want to hear your accomplishments. I want to hear your setbacks and your challenges. And I want you all to hear from me as well. What's my story? What have I struggled with? What do I still struggle with? Because with this podcast, this is new. This is my very first podcast. I'm making a slight pivot in my career as well. So this actually leads to the next part of this episode, which is, who am I? What is my story? What is my career path? What has that been like for me? And this is so important. I know over the years that people have heard of, being your authentic self. What's your story? It's almost like a trend now, but there's so much validity to it. In my practice with students or clients, I'm always talking about What's your story? You're picking this major. Why? You want to do this as a goal. Why? What has shaped you? Who has shaped you? And once you own into that and figure that out, it becomes easier for you to articulate that on paper. It's easier for you to showcase that on your online brand through virtual presence or in an interview, right? What's your story? Why should I pick you, right? How does your story relate to this company or what your ultimate goal for yourself? So I want to share that with you. So yeah, let me start. I was born in Chicago to Haitian immigrant parents. So my parents are both from Haiti, but I was raised right outside of Chicago in Harvey, Illinois. So it was near the south side of Chicago. I lived and grew up mainly in a working class neighborhood that was predominantly Black and brown. So actually my parents were immigrants, but they were, I guess, minorities in that regard because most of the Black population were from the Great Migration, right? They were descendants of the Great Migration. And so that shaped me. There were some elements of Harvey that mirrored the South Side of Chicago in terms of, class or, there were some issues in terms of the high school into some gangs and a few stuff like that. I wouldn't say it was like the roughest neighborhood in the world, but there was few abandoned buildings and things like that. I wouldn't say it was like an upper class area. I am the oldest of 8, 7 between my parents, and my dad's youngest is my half brother. And so these things have shaped me in so many different ways. And one way it has shaped me, I would say, my dad always made it a point to talk about our surroundings. We would talk about our neighborhood. We'll talk about what does it mean to be Black in America. And a part of it came from him being from Haiti. He was so proud of being Haitian. He would say Haiti was the first independent Black country, the second country outside of the United States in the Western Hemisphere, and so he was proud of that. He's like, that's in your blood. You can be president. I was like 5 years old and my dad was telling me that before Obama showed up. So, so that built confidence. And I would also say that it gave me a lot of perspective about who I am, and what it means to be Black. And one of the things he used to always say to me was that, I'm from Haiti. He would say he's from Haiti, but your neighbors, they're from the US, but we all came from Africa, right? So he was big on the commonality and how do we lift people up. And so that shaped me. And he used to talk to me about politics all the time. He would read it and he would just, from a young age, just talk to me about that. And that inspired me to major in political science and get my master's in political science at Loyola University, Chicago, because I actually wanted to go into politics, wanted to be a mayor of my town. I don't want to do that anymore. We'll talk about this throughout your career. You start learning more about yourself, what you like, your skill sets, your personality. Don't want to do that, but it still has shaped me. Right? It's shaped me because I am doing stuff. Anything that I do, I have to do it for people, and particularly whether if it's uplifting the Black community, uplifting women of color or underrepresented communities. In addition to that, being the oldest of 8, that takes a lot, right? I was taught to be a role model, right? How do you set an example? How do you make sure that if you have to take your siblings to an after school program, make sure they get there on time? So it taught me time management. It taught me motivational skills, right? So these are things that it was teaching me. And then over time, this was able to translate as I became involved with a lot of youth programming. So my mom was very involved in the church, very religious and spiritual. And so I became involved, and I had a lot of leadership positions in there as like a youth leader, social service leader. And so that taught me how to be creative, to come up with programming, how to collaborate with other church members, right? How to deal with conflict if I'm teaching Sabbath school. We grew up as Seventh-day Adventists, and so instead of Sunday school, we said Sabbath school. And so in the mornings I would teach a lesson, right? And so, even at a young age, I was doing this at like 12, 13. And so I'm pulling these things, right? As I'm talking about my story, I'm pulling things, qualities, skill sets, characteristics that I gained. And you all should make a practice of doing that. There's so many times I meet women and they're like, I did this and that's it. Well, what did you gain from that? Start writing that down. Start pausing and thinking about that. Every single experience matters. I tell students this all the time. So, so that definitely shaped me. My first paid position was at Subway. So I worked at Subway for a little while. I worked at Edible Arrangements. And then I also worked right before college, or right when I started college, worked at a nonprofit in which I provide caregiving to women who were homeless. Women's children who were homeless. So it was like a temporary shelter for them. So I did that. And then in college, I majored in political science. I connected with a few people, and, there was always something that I was doing, whether if I was volunteering and doing some form of service, or I did this thing. I can't remember the title, but it was like some type of summer radio initiative. And I was such a womanist. So womanist is basically a Black feminist. And me and another classmate, we were challenging the misogynist lyrics on a lot of the songs. And so this was like, 2005, no, 2006 and 7. I was a first year student or a sophomore student. And my old classmate was a senior. And so we were just talking about how do we challenge these sexist lyrics that are on a lot of these songs or hip hop songs. So at a young age, I had a strong identity of what was important to me or how I thought the world should be, right? I would say I toned down a bit on certain things. But it's in there, right? And that's part of the reason why I do what I do, and I choose certain volunteer projects, or I choose to be involved in certain things. So I did that. I was in a 5-year program where I finished my bachelor's degree and my master's degree. So 2010, 2011. And for the grad program, I lived on campus. During that time, I tutored, just tutored, and I tutored kids on the west side of Chicago. It was called Breakthrough Urban Ministries. And then towards like the last year of my grad program, I did AmeriCorps at Gads Hill Center, which was on the west side area, Pilsen area of Chicago, which is a predominantly Central American neighborhood, in which I did administrative work as well as after school programming. I did that. And then in addition, in terms of political science, I had 2 internships. I had an internship in Washington, D.C. with Representative Jan Schakowsky, which I liked. And I did memos. I was able to go to briefings around D.C. and write summaries. I did legislative drafts. And it was a great experience. And then in 2008, I interned for Senator Obama. I didn't meet Senator Obama. He was all over the country campaigning. And it was literally admin work, which I did a lot of organizing data type stuff and answering phone calls. And then I volunteered for the campaign later in that year. And so all of these things shaped who I am, gave me a variety of experience, admin experience, presentation experience, outreach experience, tutoring, youth, teaching experience. And so I graduated and I went home, but guess what? I couldn't find a job. I was applying for community organization or community organizing positions, advocacy positions, political analysis positions, and I didn't get anything. I would apply, and I just couldn't get anything. I didn't leverage the career services from Loyola University during undergrad, which I should have done. And I tell my siblings, I've told my siblings to use them. I tell any young person to use those services. There are a lot of studies that show that people or students who use career services make a lot more money when they graduate than those who've never used those services. So if you're listening and you have children or you have younger siblings, nieces and nephews, tell them to use their university's resources. Go and step into their career center. So that would have been so helpful for me because I was sending bad resumes. And this is something that people don't really learn, right? How to write a good letter or like cover letter or resume until they enter a center or they work with a career coach or just really after doing a lot of research, they are able to really craft an awesome resume that's tailored to the jobs that they're applying for. So anyways, also I had a few interviews and I just didn't do well in those interviews. Looking back, I was nervous. I was awkward and I needed coaching, to be honest. And a lot of people need coaching. A lot of women of color need coaching in this area. So what I did, I was home and unemployed. The AmeriCorps program ended. And I actually volunteered for my sister's school. She was at a small private institution. She was in 8th grade. I think it was less than 50 kids that were at that school. But every year they had an 8th grade trip. Usually it was organized by the parents. But for some reason, I don't know, because of the parents' schedules, they didn't really have anybody organizing it. So she asked for help. The 8th graders were doing it themselves. And she asked me to volunteer one Friday. So how they would raise money is a Friday a month, they would serve like a lunch, and make money from it, like get pizza and then make a profit from it. And so the first time I went, I saw that they didn't make a profit. And so I just took over and I, helped them create a plan and a strategy to raise money. And then also I coordinated the logistics for their actual field trip. So that was something I did for about 4 months while I was unemployed. And during that time, I always just find something to do. Like some person has a startup, let me provide some help. And so I was keeping my skills relevant. I always tell clients, even if you don't have a job right now, what can you do? Can you volunteer? And I want to have an episode on that. And then in the summers, I usually did something. So I did Chicago Cares, which they do so many different things, but I was teaching youth, 16 to 21-year-olds, young burgeoning adults. And then a few years later, I also taught social justice through Northwestern Center for Talent Development. And so they work with Johns Hopkins and University of California, Berkeley. And so I was at Johns Hopkins for 2 summers and was teaching as well. And so I was always doing something. Eventually, my aunt was like, hey, you have a master's. Why don't you teach poli-sci, political science at a community college? And so I applied at my nearest community college, which was Perry State University. in Chicago Heights. And I applied, didn't hear back for like a month or two. I noticed that there was an upcoming career fair, so I would go to career fairs as well. So I was doing certain things with the job search process that I would still recommend now, but I really wasn't doing my best. I didn't have the knowledge, right? I wasn't aware. So I ended up going to a career fair. I saw HR, so Prairie State's HR person, and I went up to her and I was like, hey, I applied to teach poli-sci, and she told me she doesn't see my resume, she doesn't see my application. So I'm like, okay, I'm gonna have to apply again. So I just walked around and they had a booth for their adult education program at Prairie State. And I just started talking to the person there. And as we were talking, she was listening to my background and she was like, oh, so you've taught? And I was like, yeah, I've done youth development. So she said, would you want to teach GED? So that's general education, classes for your general education diploma. And I said, sure. And so that's how I got into higher ed, teaching GED courses. And I actually liked it. I was working with Black and brown students, people who were trying to get a second chance at life. I was teaching reading and writing. I eventually taught math and computer science. The only thing was it was adjunct work. It was part-time. So I couldn't stay there. So I was underemployed for 2 years after I graduated with my master's. And so after that, I was recommended actually by my aunt again through a family friend to a career coach. And the career coach was a woman of color. She was great. She started working with me and she had me do Strengths Finder. Next week, I'll talk about the different tools such as Strengths Finders, assessments to help you get to know what your skills and your strengths are. And then she introduced me to informational interviewing, which is basically gathering information about different fields. So she did two things. She was like, okay, let's create a job search strategy, but let's explore. Let's make sure that you're going into the right path. You majored in political science. You were originally applying for political science type roles or positions that you thought would match your field, but it seems like you've done youth development. Now you're in adult education, right? What do you want to do? How are we going to get to that place? And so, and then she also encouraged me to, just apply. I'm single. At the time, I was single, and I had no children. Why not just apply all over the country? And so I ended up applying and I got a position in Massachusetts, at a nonprofit, and it was teaching. Well, the role was for advising. I was trying to transition out of teaching because I do like teaching, but the grading papers and everything, I didn't want to do that anymore. So the role would have been advising with part-time teaching. I went to that organization and turns out it was actually mainly teaching and a little bit of advising. So I wasn't feeling that. And also, the actual work environment wasn't necessarily my style or it didn't align with me. And so that's another part of job search and career development is, what does the place look like? What's your style? Are you into open spaces? Are you into cubicles? Do you want to work with a lot of people? Do you want to work alone? And that's going to be connected to your values. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. The great thing, though, was that I really connected with my supervisor. She was from Detroit. She was a woman of color. We were excited. She started the same year. We were excited that we were serving students of color. So they were adult students, mostly immigrant students. We also bonded because on the staff, we were the only teachers of color. And then, so she sort of took me under her wing. And over time, I shared with her that, I think I might want to make a pivot back to poli-sci, maybe, go into actual higher ed. She ended up sharing that with the executive director, and the executive director took that seriously and basically let me go. And that will be another story. Bosses, my supervisor was great. I'm still in contact with her, but, people's personalities and what happened. So basically I was let go after a year at this new job, new city, 1,000 miles away from most of my family. And my supervisor at the time was actually leaving, going back to the Midwest. So it was like, it's over. But the good thing is she introduced me to someone at her church. She invited me to her church and I went. Turns out it was the president of Roxbury Community College. And so I stayed in contact with her. And even though, for a few months, I didn't have like that full-time job. I did my summer program in Baltimore, came back, and I was unemployed in Boston for about a total of 6 months. And then I got this position at Roxbury Community College. So at Roxbury Community College, I actually really liked it. My title was Coordinator of Cooperative Education, but because it was a small institution, resource strapped, I was the career services person. So I was the career services department, basically. I did biannual career fairs. I did employer relations. I did the one-on-one appointments with students on career counseling. It was a different population. It was similar to the adult education population. The average student was a 31-year-old woman of color, immigrant with a family. And, these students were in a space of their lives or a time in their lives where they need to make a change to lift up their family, right? For the most part. And so I really enjoy doing that. But over time, and that's another podcast we can talk about, like, how do you deal with that situation? There were other things that was really, bringing down my spirit there. But I stayed there for about a year and a half, and it got to a point where I was just ready to leave. And I also was ready to go home. I wanted to, not necessarily Chicago, but closer to family. I have siblings in Tennessee and Alabama. And, one of the things that people don't talk so much about in their career is, underlying factors, outside factors, or external factors that impact your career decision making, right? You make choices based on what's around you, right? I was able to make this choice to move across the country because I'm single. What does that look like if I had a family at the time? What does that look like if I have a partner, right? That affects your career choices. And so for me, what I was missing, my family, I wanted to be like, I need to be at least 2 hours away from an immediate family member or a best friend. And don't get me wrong, I created community here. During that time before I was at RCC, when I was unemployed, I did a lot of networking, and I'll have an episode about that. But that shapes you, right? And so I started applying for positions outside of Boston. And I had a few leads actually. But for some reason I decided to just look at Boston, and so many openings were just popping up for career services. So assistant director of career services or career education at so many institutions in Boston. So that's why I applied for the position at BU, where I'm currently at. And, at the beginning, I was really still focused on leaving, going to Tennessee. First it was Texas, then it was Tennessee. And, as I started getting the interviews for BU, my family, my friends, BU, that's a great institution. I'm like, I want to go home. I want to go close to family. And, but it wasn't until I would say when I finished the second interview and they called, they told me they wanted a third interview. I was like, oh, damn, this is real. And I was like, I need to meet this challenge. Like, okay, this wasn't in my original plan, but what can I gain from here? Like, and the people I met were great. My boss the person who would be my supervisor seemed great. And so I decided to take it. And I am really grateful that I've done that. I still really like my colleagues. But it's also taught me a lot about myself, and it's continually teaching me a lot about myself. And I will share that throughout these podcasts. So in addition to that, I decided to get my MBA. So I'm currently getting my MBA at Boston University. So for those of you all who are considering getting another degree and you don't want to take on any other loans, work at a university or some type of college. Even at Roxbury Community College, which is in Boston, I could have went to any state institution and got tuition reimbursement. So we can talk about that. That could be a podcast episode. So yeah, so during that time, so I'm getting my MBA, and then I'm always involved. So right now I'm part of the Women of Color Circle. I do marketing for that. And then I'm a treasurer for the Faculty of Staff Color Network. And of course, I volunteer as a salary negotiation facilitator for the American Association for University Women. So I'm always involved. I'm always gaining new experience. So that's my career path. And I think that's one aspect. I would say the other element would be I have this entrepreneurial side of me. So while I was doing all those other things, I was always trying to start a business as well. So I read Our Black Year, The Empowerment Experiment by Maggie Anderson a few years ago. And basically in that book, she talks about the lack of Black businesses and how having no Black businesses means no money in the community. And I was like, whoa, I need to own a business. I need to find a way to encourage other people to find a business. And so I started little things. I started a muffin business. I started a body butter business called Your Body Butter. I started, a few years ago, I started a t-shirt business with socially conscious quotes. And, my family, my brothers would always say, okay, Esther, you're starting something, now finish. So in this podcast, I want you all to help me be accountable. I will coach you all to be accountable, just like I do with my students and clients. I want you all to keep me accountable as well. But yeah, so, and right now I'm in a relationship and my partner says the same thing. Okay, Esther, this is a great idea. Let's do this. So that's why I'm so excited about this podcast. I am actually doing this. So yeah, and again, I'm telling this story as a way to let you know that you find yourself through so many different avenues. When I was trying these different entrepreneurial pursuits, I'm learning more about what I like and what I don't like. I'm also learning about common themes, right? I'm always about underrepresented people, the Black community. That's my ultimate goal with all of those things. And I remember, though, when I think it was the Body Butters, and one of my sisters was like, can you picture yourself doing this every day? And I don't know why she said that to me. I don't know if she saw my personality. And I didn't really say anything, but I was like, no, I can't. And it took me years to figure out what I can do every day. What do I like? I had it in the back of my mind what I like. I love coaching. I love empowering people. I love connecting women of color. I love seeing people advance. I love saying affirmative words to people. That's such a value of mine. And how do I make that happen? And I'm realizing with this career coaching business and now with this podcast, like this is my gift, right? Talking to you all, encouraging you all, motivating you all, getting you all pumped and excited about what's next in your career. I love it when I hear a woman tell me like, oh my God, I listened to your advice. I asked for $5,000 extra more. I actually got it. I love things like that. It comes naturally, right? There's not so much of a learning curve like when I was doing the t-shirt business. I'm not I can do administrative stuff when I put my mind to it, but it's not my favorite thing. Like even with career coaching, doing resumes and cover letters is my least favorite thing. I mean, I do it. That may kind of, I might transition that service out because I prefer that coaching and checking in with people. So yeah, that's helping me learn more about myself, right? And so it took these two qualities about myself, this kind of entrepreneurial ideal person slash my skill set with speaking and presenting and coaching. How do I merge those two? And how do I merge other things? And this is still the beginning. You all are going to be a part of my journey. Like I said, I want to be a part of your journey. But I want you all to see, like, yes, I have this experience. I share how I'm credible, right? You all can listen to me. I will be sharing some facts, some articles, things like that, some career development theory. But also, you're going to see me make mistakes along the way, right? This is my very first podcast. There's so many other things that I want to do with this. I'm also getting my MBA, and I'm interested in diversity and inclusion work. I might do consulting. That's something that I'm considering. I might not, right? So you all are going to be with me. And I'm so, so excited that you're going to be part of this journey with me. I, again, am so thankful that you all are a part of my podcast and you are listening. My goal that I said next week is to talk about values, interests, personalities, and skills. That's very common within the career development world and the field. So you all will get a chance to learn about that. And then I'm also open to your feedback and suggestions. So please send me an email, check out my website, type into my contact form, whether if it's for the empowerment session to meet with me, or if it's just to share your thoughts about this episode and to give me some ideas about what I should do next. Thank you again. I can't say it enough for listening to me speak to you for the past 40 minutes or so. I hope you all have an awesome day and stay healthy during this time, right? COVID-19, that's something I want to talk about too. How do you navigate your job search during this moment, and also share some tips and advice that I've read along the way. And then be empowered, stay empowered. Ultimately, I started the career coaching business to empower women of color. So you all are super powerful beings. You are juggling so many things in your life: school, work, maybe families, businesses. And you all have so much potential. And I want you all to unlock it, right? I unlock that power. I hope to speak to you all again next week. I forgot to say, my goal is to do this every Tuesday. So stay tuned for my next episode. Thanks, y'all. Bye.